Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I am your host, Ayana Carter, and joining us this week is Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Senator the Honorable Reginald Armour. AG, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ayana. Good to be here.
Oh, welcome back to the show, I should say.
Indeed, yes.
All right, so you've just completed your first year in office as Minister of Legal Affairs. Tell us about that experience.
What a year. Yep, I completed that first year on the 15th of March. It's been a very interesting year. I took office in mid-gallop, so to speak. There was a lot of stuff happening, and I'm new to the political arena. I am new to everything except the law, which I'm very comfortable with. It has been fascinating, the mission to serve the country, the relationships that I've built with my fellow parliamentarians, with my cabinet colleagues, the commitment to doing the job that I came in here expecting to do. It has been a wonderful year, actually.
A lot has happened since you were last here. Let's talk about the recently concluded Crime Symposium. What are your thoughts?
I found that to be a remarkable experience. I am, as the population will know, I am a Caribbean person in addition to being a Trinbagonian citizen, so that I was very comfortable and pleased to be meeting with a lot of people that I know from my previous life in private practice and from university days. I was at university with the current Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Mr. Philip Pear. I practiced law in the Bahamas with the current Prime Minister of the Bahamas and Chairman of CARICOM, Honorable Philip Davis, Philip Brave Davis, as we call him. And I am very familiar with and have very strong relations with Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, with the Prime Minister of Dominica, Honorable Roosevelt Skerritt, and I consider the Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Mia Motley, a personal friend. I know her family, her dad, and her brother from many years ago. So it was, for me, a very welcoming embrace of my Caribbeanness, and I was particularly struck by the leadership of Dr. Rowley, Prime Minister, to have had the foresight and the sense of the now to invite the symposium to Trinidad and Tobago to talk about something which we are all very concerned about, crime. But not just crime, crime as a threat, as the Prime Minister of Jamaica put it, which has the potential to threaten our very existence, because it is revealing as a symptom that there is a lot that we need to fix in our societies. So it touched on education, it touched on our psychological health, it touched on a number of things, our health systems, the threat to our very sense of comfort and being. And I came away from that symposium remarkably impressed by the sense of commitment of Caribbean leaders, by the sense of the strong camaraderie that exists among our CARICOM leaders, because that's very important, the respect that they have for Dr. Rowley, and their willingness to share with us something which, understandably, in our context, we might think is our problem and our problem only, which is crime. But the reality exists for us throughout the Caribbean, and we were able to come together and recognize in the symposium that we had and the several conversations that we are all facing a problem that is common to all of us, and we're only going to be able to deal with it and get on top of it if we join hands and deal with it together.
Was there a particular issue that stood out for you during that symposium?
It would be difficult to name one. The issues which stood out for me, foremost, as I've just said, is the fact that we are sharing a common problem. And an example of that, for instance, had to do with an advice that I had given to the Prime Minister a month before the symposium, where we were asked to sign on to a lawsuit, as the Latin term is amicus curiae, friends of the court, that Mexico has commenced against gun manufacturers in the United States of America. Because the problem that we are having is that the gun manufacturers are allowing their guns out of the United States to flow into the Caribbean Sea and onto our shores. And I came away very impressed with the sense of togetherness that we had. We had the Chief Minister of Guadeloupe here with us. We had representatives from Mexico. So what stood out for me was the sense of togetherness that we are part of in our so-called Caribbean basin, which borders on South America and the southern islands, the northern islands of the Caribbean, which are part of France, Guadeloupe and Martinique.
The Caribbean Firearm Study 2023 was launched just last week. Can you speak a little bit about this initiative?
Yes, and again, we just finished talking about what came out of the Caribbean Symposium that we had, and we had the firearms study launched by CARICOM Impacts, which is a very important organization that has been working with the Caribbean governments for many years. And what that study does for us, and it is something which I believe it was Prime Minister Davis talked about, is the need for us to identify the data. We need the data to work with, and what that study is doing is giving us the data so that we can understand what we are dealing with, so that we can make the plans to combat the reality of illegal arms coming into Trinidad and Tobago.
There was a suggestion to rotate magistrates and judges across the region. How does the CCJ, being the final court of appeal for all CARICOM countries, play in this coming to fruition?
You've just got me onto my favorite subject, so stop me, because I'm going to talk for the rest of the day on this, the Caribbean Court of Justice. A coming home to our dignity and self-respect. One of the things that the Caribbean Court of Justice is doing across the Caribbean, and now understand the Caribbean Court of Justice is a court for all countries of the Caribbean which have signed on to its original jurisdiction that deals with trade and economic issues arising from the CARICOM Treaty. But it is only the final appellate court for 4 countries in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago not being one of those, very regrettably. But what the Caribbean Court of Justice has been doing throughout the Caribbean is instituting training programs for all systems with the administration of justice across the Caribbean, including judges and magistrates. And it is going to be a simple fix, in my view, if we can utilize the resource that the Caribbean Court of Justice has brought to all of us, if we begin to rotate our judges and our magistrates. I'm going to be having a meeting next week, I hope, with other CARICOM attorneys general. And one of the things on the agenda will be to discuss that. I am hoping that we can begin to, as the next steps moving forward, begin to discuss that and to have a conversation with the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders.
AG, you indicated you'd be bringing legislation to abolish preliminary inquiries. How soon can we see that happening, and what will be the immediate benefits of such legislation?
Before I answer the question, can I just say something about that? I was actually at a cocktail party a couple evenings ago, Prime Minister's Golf Classic, and I got into an interesting conversation with one of the guests, and he asked me about this particular piece of legislation. And I started telling him about the legislation by referring to the name of the legislation, which is a very long name. And he stopped me and he said, AG, you lawyers like to talk law. Tell me about it in terms that I will understand. So here it is. It's the fast-tracked criminal trial piece of legislation that is going to move our trials of criminal indictments from the present reality that exists now, preliminary inquiries, 15 years before you move from charge to committal and get into the High Court. The period of time is going to be 6 months. We're going to abolish the preliminary inquiries from charge to committal before a master of the High Court, and in some cases before the magistrates, is going to move from 15 years to 6 months. And hopefully within 2 to 3 years, the trial will be over and done with. The guilty will serve the time, and the innocent will walk.
You alluded to one of the immediate benefits. What are some of the other benefits to having that instituted?
Well, the wholesome benefit of it is an improved criminal justice system. At the moment, we have a lot of people on remand, too many people on remand awaiting trial. It's going to mean less people on remand for less time, or less time of those people on remand. It is going to mean greater confidence by the citizens in the criminal justice system, because you can only have confidence in something that you can see is working for you. And if the criminal justice system is working too slowly, then you lose confidence in the system. The victims don't feel that they have got justice. The accused feel that the trial has taken too long and therefore they are being dealt with unfairly. So we're seeing a holistic approach to improving the criminal justice system.
AJ, what's the state's position on the death penalty?
The state's position on the death penalty is simply that that is the law. The penalty for murder is death by hanging. And there has been no movement on that for as long as the law has been on our law books. It will continue to be applied after a woman has had a fair trial and the guilty verdict comes in.
The High Court recently awarded the men accused of murdering businesswoman Vindra Naipal Kuhlman just over $20 million. Justice Stanley John would have handed in the interim report. How much of what is contained in that report can you share with us?
Other than the fact that Justice Stanley John, a very well-respected Caribbean, Trinidadian, Tobagonian jurist, has handed in the interim report, I would not be prepared to share anything about it other than to say it is a very well-informed, very serious piece of work. The investigation, which Justice John is leading, continues because there are other significant things that his terms of reference have engaged him to do in terms of systemic improvements in the civil law department, the chief state solicitor and solicitor general's departments. And I would not want to reveal what's in that report until he has concluded the exercise, which I expect will be by June, July of this year.
Now, there was a big win for the state recently, a Miami court ruling in favor of the government in the Piarco Airport civil forfeiture case. What are your thoughts on the landmark victory?
I have recused myself from any involvement in the case because I had formerly represented Mr. Kwaitong, one of the defendants in that matter. I will simply say it's a significant victory, but I would not wish to comment further.
And as we are on the Piarco case, we saw where the case against former Prime Minister Basdio Pandey, his wife Armour, and businessmen Steve Ferguson and Ishwar Galbaran Singh was discontinued. A lot of state resources went into this matter. Now, as Attorney General, is there cause for concern when high-profile matters such as these are either dismissed or discontinued?
Yes, there must be cause for concern. Beyond that, again, I would not wish to comment. Mr. Ishwar Galbaran Singh and Mr. Ferguson are co-defendants in the same Miami case, so the evidence would be largely about the same thing. I wouldn't allow myself to comment on it. I'm recused from any comment on any aspect of the Piarco Airport cases.
Is there anything that can be done differently to ensure more successful prosecutions and convictions in matters involving the state?
Yes, and it's a work in progress. I've already mentioned one of the things that is being done, and that is what I call the fast track to trial law, which I actually took through Cabinet and is going to Parliament within the next fortnight. That is to improve the system of trials, of indictable trials. We've just also put into Parliament a trial by judge alone, so we are looking to refine the process by which, even though people are still entitled to be tried by a judge and jury on their election, we are now giving them the opportunity, accused persons, to opt for trials without a jury. And there are a number of other pieces of legislation in the works that are all looking to improve the criminal justice system so as to provide for more speedy, secure, and fair trials for persons accused of major crime. The incident of the $20 million damages award, which the persons who were accused of the murder of Mrs. Vindra Naipaul Coleman, they got against the state. And what that has allowed me to do in the terms of reference of Justice John, who's been appointed to investigate what occurred, is not just to investigate why and how did the file disappear, but to come up with recommendations under his terms of reference, which have been settled on the advice of Justice Ralston Nelson, to come up with recommendations on improving the civil law department of the Ministry of the Attorney General so that we don't have those kinds of things occurring again. And if they're going to occur, it'll be 1 in a million years, because this country deserves better and we don't want to have a repeat of that. So I'm looking forward to the recommendations coming out of Justice John's report when he produces the final part of the report. But the second very substantive thing that he's going to produce, which I have asked him to produce on the terms of reference which were drafted by Justice Ralston Nelson at my request, is to look at the entire civil law department, which deals with the Office of the Solicitor General and the Chief State Solicitor, and come up with recommendations to improve the functioning of our civil law department so that what occurred in that case of the defendants being able to get, the claimants being able to get a default judgment against the state that ended up in a $20 million judgment because a file went missing and it is now under investigation. We're not going to allow that to happen again. We're going to fix the system. And Justice John is going to come up with the recommendations that will enable us to do that.
Now, AG, this brings me to comments made by the Director of Public Prosecutions, Roger Gaspard, SC, about a month ago. He described the staff shortage at his office as chronic, saying several of the 58 attorneys there have little to no experience in prosecuting criminal cases. The office of the DPP falls under your ministry. How do you respond?
Yes, we acknowledge that there are challenges in the DPP's department. I certainly acknowledge that there are staff shortages, and also that the majority of, if not, well, many of the attorneys are relatively young. The more senior members of the DPP's department have moved on in their progression with their careers. Some of them have more recently become judges. So there is no question that there are staff shortages. The DPP and I have been having very meaningful, very mature conversations. Those conversations are ongoing, and I have made a very firm commitment to the director that we will work with him shoulder to shoulder to address the problems that he has, to ensure that he has an improved and efficient Director of Public Prosecutions Office. And that's an ongoing process.
And coming from that meeting, what assurances can you give to the members of the public who are looking at this situation and are expressing concern?
The assurances that I can give to the public are that, given the nature of my personality, I engage people in meaningful ways, and I am a solutions-oriented person. I am therefore committed to working with the DPP. I acknowledge his problems. I'm not denying that he has challenges, and I have invited him, and I am happy to say he has accepted the challenge to work with me towards resolving his problems. And out of that, I expect very positive outcomes.
Now, looking back at all that has happened during your term as AG, do you have any regrets?
No, none at all. I don't. It has been a fascinating year. I took the job when the Prime Minister asked me to, accepting that, I could bring something to the plate. And I continue to think that I have quite a lot to offer. So I am no regrets and looking forward to it.
Last year, TNT recorded its highest murder count in history. Are our current laws sufficient to deal with the increase in murders, and in particular, gang-related murders?
Our laws need updating. In fact, you'll recall, one of the comments that was made by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Mia Mottley, is that many of our laws are updated. Trinidad and Tobago is fortunate. We've had a very aggressive legislative program over the last couple of years, We have brought many of our laws into the 21st century. In gang-related offenses, we have the gang legislation. And at this point in time, we are looking to having the police do the work that they need to do to bring members of gangs before the courts and to have them prosecuted so that they do the time.
AG, the last time you came on, we discussed your legislative agenda and the ambitions you had at that time for this parliamentary term. How has that been progressing?
It's been progressing well. We've brought through a number of pieces of legislation, and I actually anticipated a question like that, so I walked with a little list. I'm not going to bore you, but we've brought into effect the cannabis control legislation, which is going to give people an opportunity to recognize that cannabis is not a drug that is of such a danger that it has to be completely outlawed. So we're giving members of the society an opportunity to work with the government in using cannabis at a commercial level for particular purposes and regulating its use so that it is not a complete outlaw situation. We've brought firearms amendments legislation to the Parliament and a number of other pieces of legislation. Most recently, we have brought, and it was very much in the news for quite a while, we have brought the Scrap Metal Act into effect. And only this weekend, this Thursday just gone, we passed the regulations that are going to permit the industry to resume, and we also gave effect in Cabinet to the scrap metal inspectors regulations that's going to allow the Ministry of Trade to put the inspectors out there to inspect what is going on so that what we were experiencing before, that is to say, illegal activities stripping away our copper and other metal networks are not being stripped out. So significant progress on that vein, yeah.
What continues to be a challenge for you as Attorney General?
The challenge is that it is a lot of work, and I'm very fortunate, and I said this on the last occasion, and I'll go on record to say it again, I'm very fortunate to have taken over the helm of a ministry that is outfitted and personed by some very bright, very hardworking, talented attorneys and professional and administrative staff who support them. The challenge is to keep pace with the legislative agenda that I'm hoping to build out over the next year or two. So, for instance, I will be bringing to Parliament the arbitration bill, which is going to, I think, make a significant improvement in Trinidad and Tobago's commercial environment, because we know that our civil court system is not as efficient as we'd like it to be. And if we can take a significant part of our commercial disputes into arbitration and have specialist persons who are experienced in the areas in which the disputes are arising, deal with our commercial disputes under the United Nations UNCITRAL model of arbitration law, I think that's going to attract a lot of business to Trinidad, because they will be satisfied that their disputes are going to be dealt with on an international basis in an expeditious way. And there's other legislation that I'm bringing to Parliament that I'm very optimistic about. So the challenge is going to keep pace with the legislation to get it passed in Parliament. One of our challenges, which I will not shirk from saying, is we have to ensure that we get the support of the opposition on the legislation that we are bringing to Parliament. Some of it may involve a three-quarter majority. I hope that the opposition will step up to the plate and recognize that the national interest requires them to give us the support. We are attempting to make the job easier for the opposition by bringing a number of pieces of legislation which require only a simple majority, and I look forward to the contribution of the debates in Parliament to pass those pieces of bills, as we call them, before they become legislation into law. We got a good bit of work done in my first year, and I'm building out now into my second year. And one of the things that has been introduced, which I take as a challenge that I embrace with both arms, is coming out of the regional symposium. The heads of government at the end of that symposium produced a communique, and that was on the evening of Tuesday. By Tuesday night, I had sent WhatsApps to the heads of different departments in my ministry: Criminal Justice Unit, Central Authority that deals with extradition, the Intellectual Property Organization that deals with artists and young people and protecting their property, the Anti-Terrorism Unit that deals with anti-terrorism and money laundering legislation. And we actually met, to their credit, I sent them the WhatsApp on Tuesday night. By 8 o'clock the following Monday, we met and we had an hour-long conference. And I said to them, I want you to give me an agenda coming out of this communique for our next steps in terms of Trinidad and Tobago's legislative agenda that is going to collaborate with the region, but also put Trinidad's interests first, public health as a serious threat to our crime, as a serious threat to our public health. And in fact, one of the things that I spoke about when I was moderating the Prime Minister's first panel discussion on the Monday morning, I spoke about the fact that I was bringing the legislation to abolish preliminary inquiries, the fast track to trial legislation. When I was in the Senate, I got a call. I eventually left the Senate to respond to the call because I saw the name come up on my phone. One of the most senior, respected practitioners out of Barbados has already called me to say, I saw that morning that you mentioned this piece of legislation. Can you share it with us? So already the regional symposium is producing the interaction with practitioners and hopefully the attorneys general that I'm in touch with that is going to give us an agenda going forward to promote Trinidad and Tobago's best interests and the best interests of the CARICOM.
Now, switching gears, there have been calls for government to repatriate TNT nationals stuck in camps in Syria. You're on record as saying there are several factors to consider before this can be done. What's the latest?
The latest with regard to that, and it is a complex situation, and the latest with regard to that, as you'll recall, very recently, the Prime Minister had a meeting at Whitehall with a team of persons whom he has appointed to advise the government on this. It's headed by former Speaker Mr. Nizam Mohammed, and the other members are Mr. Kwasi Ateba and a former diplomat. And they are doing the work, very importantly, of speaking with the community in Trinidad and Tobago, the family members who are understandably distraught by the situation that the widows and children of Trinidadian males who went to Syria and Turkey and Iraq to fight for ISIS. The men have been killed, their children and their wives remain, and this team is going to be working diplomatically, supporting the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs to speak with the international community and the countries that we need to speak with, to put things in place to bring people back, and also making sure in collaboration with the Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Education, because health is going to be, education is going to be important, their health is going to be important, their social, psychological, psychosocial health is going to be important. So there's a very serious work in progress at the moment that is ongoing, that is being headed by former Speaker Mr. Nizam Mohammed. And I am expecting that we will begin to see the results of the work that he's doing within a reasonable period of time.
And AJ, do you have any final thoughts?
My final thoughts, Ayana, are that I'm looking forward to getting the job done, to continuing to do the best that I can. I'm looking forward to the continued support of my parliamentary colleagues, on both sides of the bench. I have to say that I am very impressed with the government bench that I find myself part of whenever I'm in Parliament, and I participate in and listen to the debate that comes from the government side. I'm very impressed with the quality and the caliber of people that I have the privilege to be working with, and I look forward to continuing to work with them, and I look forward to continuing to invite the opposition to accept me as a colleague in the best interests of Trinidad and Tobago and not their enemy.
And that's our show. Thank you so much, Honorable Attorney General, for joining us for this week's episode of Delving Deeper.
Thank you very much, Ayana, and it's good to be here.
Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Ayana Carter, and from all of us here, have a good night.